Well, welcome back to the Proverbs series, guys. We're actually going to stay in chapter 27. I know, pretty crazy because usually, on a new day we go to a new chapter, but honestly, obviously we know, that all of scripture is good, right? Everything we see in the Bible is good and beneficial. It says that in, I think, Second Timothy 3 or 4, something like that. But I was looking into chapter 28, and honestly, I felt like a lot of those verses, while they are still good and beneficial, as I said, a lot of them couldn't be expanded and expounded on um, to the same depth that some of like basically there's more verses in 27, bro, that I think are really really profound for us to go over. So the verse for this video is uh 27 verse 2. It reads, "Let someone else praise you and not your own mouth, an outsider and not your own lips." And the reason I wanted to look at this verse specifically is because I feel like self-promotion, right, has never been more normalized than it is right now. Like LinkedIn, bro, I use that every day. Like LinkedIn exists almost entirely, though, as a platform for people to narrate their own accomplishments, right? Personal branding is an actual industry with social media and stuff. The advice, like advocate for yourself, right? Like that advice, bro, saturates professional development culture to the point where staying quiet about your own achievements is increasingly framed as a strategic mistake rather than a virtue. And so we've built entire social ecosystems around the premise that if you do not tell people how good you are, nobody else will. And into that cultural moment, Proverbs 27:2, I believe, drops a single clean instruction that cuts directly against the grain of all of it. It says, "Let someone else praise you, not your own mouth. Let an outsider say it, not your own lips." I mean, the verse does not argue extensively for this position. It does not present a lengthy case for why self-praise is counterproductive or socially awkward, but it simply states the principle with the same quiet confidence that characterizes Solomon's best observations, the confidence of someone who has watched enough human behavior to know what wisdom looks like and what it does not. So, self-praise does not look like wisdom, right? And the reason it does not is more theologically significant, I believe, than it might first appear. So let's break down the verse here. It says, "Let someone else praise you and not your own mouth." The command here opens with a permission that contains within it its own instruction, right? "Let someone else praise you" is not a prohibition against ever being praised, but it is a redirection of where legitimate praise should originate. So praise is not the problem, but the source of it is. For context, the word praise here encompasses commendation, the celebration of achievement, and the public recognition of genuine worth or accomplishment. So Solomon is not saying that being acknowledged for real work well done is wrong, but he is saying, I believe, that the acknowledgement carries weight and credibility only when it comes from somewhere other than the person receiving it. Right? Self-generated praise is a fundamentally different thing from praise that arrives from the outside. And I think the difference is not merely social or reputational. I think it's a difference in the kind of thing it actually is. So think about it, right? When someone else praises you, at least two things are happening simultaneously. At least in my experience. The accomplishment or character being recognized has been perceived and valued by someone who is not you, which means it has demonstrated reality in the world outside of your own assessment of it. And the person offering the praise has nothing immediately to gain from doing so, which gives the praise a credibility that self-praise structurally cannot possess. And so self-praise does neither of those things, right? It tells the room what you think of yourself, which is the least reliable information available about your actual worth. Every human being has a natural tendency to evaluate themselves generously, to weigh their contributions more heavily than others might weigh them, to remember their successes more vividly than their failures. Self-praise draws on that biased source and presents it as an objective assessment. The room almost always knows the difference, though. And I think this connects directly to what we established in Proverbs 11:2, where pride comes and disgrace follows. right? Self-praise is pride given a specific behavioral expression. It's the elevation of one's own assessment of oneself above the assessment of others and above the patient posture of letting one's actual work and character speak for itself. And as Proverbs 11:2 established, that elevation reliably produces disgrace rather than the honor that it was seeking. And look, Proverbs 25:27, even the verse that sits 2 chapters before this verse, I think it makes a closely related observation. It says, "It is not good to eat too much honey, nor is it glorious to seek one's own glory." Right? The seeking of one's own glory is the self-praise of Proverbs 27:2 given a slightly different frame. The comparison of eating too much honey is instructive, because honey is good, right? Like, glory is real and legitimate when it arrives appropriately, but seeking it for yourself through self-promotion produces something sickening in the same way that honey consumed to excess produces something sickening. And so the thing itself is not the problem, but the self-directed seeking of it is. Now, the verse also says an outsider and not your own lips, right? This part of the verse, I think, reinforces the first with a slight escalation. The word translated outsider here is sometimes rendered as stranger or another in the Hebrew, and it describes someone beyond your immediate circle, right? Someone with no particular investment in making you look good. The outsider's praise carries an even higher credibility premium than the praise of a close friend or colleague, because the outsider has no relational motivation to flatter. And I think this is an observation about the economics of credibility. Right? Praise has value in proportion to the independence of its source. The mother who tells her child they are the most talented person in the room is saying something real about her love for her child, but very little about the child's actual talent. The stranger who observes the same child and says the same thing is saying something about the child's actual talent. The outsider's praise is worth more precisely because of the distance from which it is offered. So, like, when it says your own lips, I think it is the instrument being specifically forbidden as the source of praise. And the image is physical in a way that I think is worth noticing. I mean, the lips are the same instrument that Proverbs 26:24 in the last chapter described as the mechanism of the enemy's disguise. The same instrument that Proverbs 16:24 described as the source of gracious words that heal. And the same instrument that throughout Proverbs is consistently identified as capable of building or destroying depending on how it is used. Here, the lips are being told to close on a specific subject, namely the subject of their owner's own worth and accomplishment. And even Jesus addresses this principle in the context of religious practice in Matthew 6:1-4 with an application that goes even further than Proverbs 27:2. It says, beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Thus, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Wow. Right? Like, even Jesus is saying it, right? The reward sought through self-promotion is the human recognition that comes in the moment. And Jesus identifies that as the full extent of the reward. The person who lets the outsider praise them, who does their work without announcing it, receives something from a different source entirely. So this connects back to the economy of reward we have seen multiple times in this series, right? The person who promotes themselves has already claimed whatever recognition they are going to receive from human sources. The person who does not has positioned themselves for the recognition that comes from the one whose assessment actually matters. Proverbs 27:2 here is not just a social etiquette rule. It is a statement about where we are looking for our validation and whether the source we are looking to is worth looking. So let's get practical here with some applications. First thing is to let our work speak before our words do. I think the most practical application of Proverbs 27.2, in a professional and social context specifically, is the development of the discipline of allowing the quality of our work to precede any verbal description of it. In most contexts, the people we work with, serve alongside, or live in community with are perfectly capable of perceiving genuine quality when it is consistently present. And the person whose work is genuinely excellent and whose character is consistently good does not need to explain or announce those things, because they become visible over time. Right? And so the self-promotional announcements we feel compelled to make are often symptoms of anxiety that the work is not being seen rather than evidence that is not good. And I think channeling that anxiety back into the quality of the work itself rather than into the verbal promotion of it is the practical posture that Proverbs 27:2 is calling us toward. Second thing is to develop the specific discipline of deflecting credit rather than accumulating it. I think one of the most concrete expressions of the principle behind this verse is the habit of redirecting praise toward others when it arrives rather than receiving it exclusively and adding it to our own account. This does not mean false modesty, the performance of self-deprecation designed to generate more praise by making the deflection seem generous, but it does mean the genuine practice of acknowledging the contributions of others when they are real, crediting the sources of wisdom and help that we drew on, and refusing to construct a narrative of our own accomplishments that inflates our individual role at the expense of the community, the mentors, and the God who made whatever success is being praised possible in the first place. So that habit, I believe, is not just social grace, but it is the practical expression of the accurate self-assessment that humility requires. And the third thing is to examine what our self-promotional impulses are actually revealing about where we are looking for our sense of worth. The deepest application of Proverbs 27:2, I believe, is the one that asks why we feel the compulsion to praise ourselves in the first place. Right? The impulse towards self-promotion is almost always rooted in some degree of anxiety about whether we are being seen and valued by the people whose opinion we care about. Right? It is the attempt to fill a gap in our sense of worth through the mechanism of making sure other people know what we have done and who we are. And I think that gap does not actually get filled by self-praise, which is part of why self-promotional people tend to require ongoing amounts of it rather than arriving at a settled satisfaction. And so the underlying need is for a sense of worth that is stable enough not to require constant external confirmation. And I think that kind of stable worth is not found in what other people think of us, even when they are saying the right things, but it is found in the subtle knowledge of being known and valued by the God whose assessment of us is not contingent on our performance. Right? Proverbs 27:2, guys, is pointing us away from the broken cistern of self-generated praise and towards the only source of worth that does not require maintenance through self-promotion. Alright, so let me just give a closing thought. Proverbs 27:2 is one of those verses that the more time you spend with it, the more it reveals about the nature of genuine confidence versus the performed confidence of self-promotion. Right? The person who genuinely does not need to praise themselves is not the person with nothing to offer, but they are the person whose sense of worth is not contingent on making sure the room knows what they have done. And so that kind of settled, unperformed confidence is rare. And it is one of the most quietly powerful things a person can carry into any room they enter. So let someone else praise you. But do the work still, right? Build a character, but just stay humble about the outcome. Right? I mean, look, if the praise is warranted, it will arrive from the outside without needing to be manufactured. And I think that praise, when it comes, actually means something. Because the other kind, the self-glazing, that never mattered.